Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show post-game. Joining us now is Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. And he's also a professor of logic at Perimeter College at Georgia State University and has a great Patreon page, which you should Patreon up with. Ben, welcome, and say hi to Professor Wolff.
Thank you. Hi, Professor Wolff.
Oh, you got to turn him up. Oh. Sorry. Professor Wolff does not do headphones tonight. He's not up for it. Say it again.
Hi, how are you doing, Professor Wolff?
Okay, how are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good.
Yeah, got, was in Nevada over the weekend and, obviously very happy about how that,
Nice.
that was really good.
Did it not play? Jesus Christ. Talk about, we need some Mike Bloomberg style efficiency in here. All right, there we go. Ben Burgis helping Bernie absolutely eviscerate the competition in Nevada.
Yeah, no, it was good. And I kind of knew, I didn't know it was going to turn out as well as it did, but what I was doing is as part of a group of people who were talking to cab drivers on the Las Vegas Strip, and organized them to caucus. And of course, lots of them couldn't because they weren't citizens, or they just couldn't get the time off work, or they couldn't afford the lost income.
Right.
But I will say it was remarkable that some of them are Republicans, of course, but the ones who are Democrats, every person, nobody I talked to said that they were supporting Warren or Biden or Klobuchar or any of these people. It was either anybody who expressed a political opinion, with very few exceptions, it was either I'm a Republican or I support Bernie.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of that, this is what tonight's debunk is about, because floating in the air over the last couple of weeks, as it has become clear that Bernie Sanders almost certainly, that's the thing that really underlined here, even at this point, if things went in the way we would not want them to go, and I cannot emphasize enough that in the primary and the general election, everybody should be thinking in terms of big wins for this effort. But even if things went on like Iowa and New Hampshire, which were, Bernie won, but we wish they were bigger margins, blah, 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 it would be almost inconceivable that Bernie Sanders is not going to the summer convention with the most votes and the most delegates. And as if on cue, the Warren campaign, people around it, pundits on MSNBC, various muckety-mucks like Howard Dean, all of a sudden, after ranting and raving for 3 years, there was nothing more sacred than one person, one vote in this country, and those dastardly Russians have undermined it with Facebook ads or whatever. We should just go into the convention and just cancel the popular will because it's, technically okay because of antiquated, ridiculous rules that were not scrapped several years ago. So, Ben, what you're going to do tonight, and let's start with this montage. We played Warren earlier, but this is every candidate on stage besides Bernie Sanders saying that they would be willing to subvert democracy in the summer. We're going to play that, and then, Ben, you are going to apply logic to what is, in fact, just crass cravenness.
We are less than 2 weeks away from a national primary. And I want to ask all of you this simple question. There's a very good chance none of you are going to have enough delegates to the Democratic National Convention that clinch this nomination. Okay? If that happens, I want all of your opinions on this. Should the person with the most delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority? Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this
that
yes or no to
everybody
make it
else,
fast.
everybody
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Please don't nominate this guy.
Convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily. Not to listen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot.
So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Most votes should become the nominee.
5 no's and a yes.
All right. So, I just want to also add here, because this is a really important point. We're going to keep here, Russia's going to be deployed and Russia's trying to help Bernie and blah, 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 melodrama. I totally think that Donald Trump will refuse to recognize the results of any election he loses. And I have no doubt he has an attorney general in Bill Barr that is effective and smart and autocratic and will help him. There is nothing the Democratic Party can do more to support an effort like that than fuck around with this convention business. There is nothing they could do. And so, as with all other psychological projection, the endless hyperventilating and melodrama about, sure, it shouldn't happen. The United States should not interfere abroad. Russia shouldn't, yada, 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 whatever. Sure. That's not what's threatening democracy. And all of a sudden, after, all of this hyperventilating, the Democrats become the formal threats inside the primary and inside a general by empowering Trump with this kind of argumentation.
Yeah.
But anyways, Ben, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I would just say, piggybacking on that last point, that, even though, I've always been open to seeing where the evidence leads on the Russia stuff. I have been saying, I know a lot of us have been saying for a long time, that alarmism about Russia is a much bigger threat to democracy than Russia is in America. Right. And we always saw that this was going to be directed at the left eventually, which is what we saw in the happily, pathetically failed attempt at an October surprise before Nevada. So yeah, if things keep going the way that Nevada did rather than the way that Iowa and New Hampshire did, then maybe we don't have to worry about this, right? Maybe Sanders will in fact get an outright majority on the first ballot, and I'm sure they'll still try to come up with something to stop him, but they won't be able to do what they're talking about here. But in case it doesn't, we really need to be prepared for this, and we really need to be pushing back against it now and talking about the sanctity of giving the nomination to the person who got the most votes. So we've been hearing all these arguments the last couple of weeks about how, well, you can't, it would actually be undemocratic to give the person who got the most votes the nomination. And the argument is it would actually be undemocratic because if, Sanders only got in this crowded field, 35%, 40%, whatever, and a few of the centrists put together got more than him, then the argument goes, even though you would think it would be much less democratic to hand the nomination to somebody who got 20% as opposed to 40%, the way the argument they'll use is that we can kind of pool together all the votes for Biden and Buttigieg and, Ollie Klobuchar into one super candidate. And that once we've that essentially all of these are votes for Bernie hating centrism, and that's how we should interpret them. And it's important to break down exactly what's wrong with that, because all the evidence that we have about the intentions of voters right now goes against that. So I'll just mention 3 things that really undermine that idea that we could just pool together the centrist candidates' votes. Which we shouldn't even need to look at specific data to undermine that. It should just be common sense, because in order to believe this narrative, you have to believe that voters are policy preference robots who don't vote on anything except for policy, that personality doesn't affect them, electability calculations don't affect them. It's nothing but who's least like Bernie Sanders, in their politics, which is absurd on its face. But 3 things that really undermine it. The first 2, I just want to give a quick shout out to a really good article in Jacobin by Seth Ackerman called The Cosmic Irony of the Rise of Bernie Sanders, which is one of the most insightful things that I've read about the dynamics of the race. And in there, he mentions a couple of these stats. One of them is that when asked whether Bernie Sanders' views and values line up with your own, Democratic primary voters by a 2-to-1 margin say yes. And when asked which candidate would you be disappointed if they won? Only 23% of Democratic primary voters say Bernie Sanders. That's pretty incredible. But the most significant one comes from Nevada, which is as if we didn't already know that voters' ideological self-description doesn't mean very much. This should really, really confirm that, which is that not only did Bernie win a majority of voters who call themselves very liberal. Of course, they don't ask if you're a socialist or social democrat on these polls. They use these antiquated categories. But Democratic caucus goers in Nevada who considered themselves moderate, more of those voted for Bernie Sanders than any other candidate. Yep. And even caucus goers who described themselves as conservative Democrats, more of them voted for Bernie Sanders than any other candidate. So I think it would come to as a hell of a shock to these people, these voters, that because we don't, people aren't asking nearly enough questions about how exactly they would rank the candidates and everything. It'd be great if we did have ranked choice voting. We don't. But based on all the statistical evidence we have, this assumption that any vote for anybody but Bernie is like a transferable vote for centrism is just silly.
Perfect. In the last couple of minutes, Professor Wolff, can you link this to a Marxist critique of like base and superstructure? And just like, just the idea, though, that everybody else is running around talking about technicalities now versus just the basic idea of an actual democratic process working.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is a Marxist analysis or not, but there's a basic conundrum here that everybody's dancing around because they don't seem to want to face it. The Democratic Party is a coalition. It always was. Just like the Republicans. I mean, it's a different kind of coalition, but it's an amalgam. And coalitions, especially when big changes in a society happen, fall apart. That's the nature of this whole business. The Democratic Party, if it stiffs Bernie, who has the majority of delegates, is getting very close to breaking apart. There will be large numbers of people, myself included, who will be arguing very strongly that party is not a vehicle for the change that millions and millions of Americans want, and therefore you're going to have to face something. And this will be said whether Bernie himself goes along with it or not.
Right. That's absolutely true.
Just like in the Republican Party, you have building now a level of antagonism and disaffection from Trump, which, if we have the kind of economic meltdown he's doing everything he can to avoid, either before the election or after, you're going to see the fracturing of that coalition also, whether or not he's comfortable with it. These are parts of the events that happen when the middle falls apart. The middle has fallen apart in most European countries. It's happening here. And these are the kinds of consequences when capitalism breaks down the consensus without which it can't survive.
Ben Burgis, thank you as always. Give them an argument, Logic for the Left. Check out all of Ben's great work. We appreciate it, Ben. Thanks as always.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Take care. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.